Hey everyone, happy Friday. After the quiz for today, you'll be more than half done with the class. You may have noticed on the syllabus we have next Wednesday off, no reading, no assignment, nothing. And then the last week of class, we just have 3 days. We go through Wednesday and then you have a final, but that's it. So we're really almost in the home stretch, even though we just finished week 2. Earlier this week, I mentioned that corn could be the ultimate or quintessential American food, and another possibility is also often made from corn, cereal. Like corn, cereal embodies so many American values that we've been reading about: industry, innovation, commerce, capitalism, technology, modernity, and so on. The main points of this video are to use cereal to illustrate a few themes in American food. One, to describe crucial implications of industrializing American food and diet. Concerns about quality, concerns about quantity, concerns about healthfulness. And 2, to outline how technology was not just a way to control nature, to expand growing seasons or have access to cheaper, more varieties of food, which was true, but also to improve nature. And we would be better as a country, we'd be better as citizens if we ate more industrialized processed foods, because we could take advantage of technology to make us healthier. Today's video is also very useful background for Monday's topic of nutrition, economy, and citizenship, which really looks at how much dietary advice and moral advice have long been intertwined. To understand what cereal represented when it emerged in the late 1890s, we have to briefly look back a little bit further to see what was happening in American food in the earlier 1800s. In the early years of the 19th century, Americans' endless commercial ambition, and you kind of see it represented here in this New York harbor scene. One Baltimore paper in 1815 described Americans as having almost universal ambition to get forward. And this universal ambition remade the nation. An old subsistence world was being transformed into a new, modern, and commercial nation. More and more farmers grew crops, not just for self-sufficiency, but for profit. Farmers began, and this would really accelerate in the early 20th century, to become more like businessmen, producing a commodity. Crucially, in the 1830s, not the 1930s, but the 1830s, I think I've said this before, more people are becoming consumers rather than producers of food. And I can't emphasize this enough because it's a huge inflection point in history. We're reconfiguring the nature of agriculture, the nature of commerce. The ongoing industrialization of agriculture just completely changed the size, the nature of American farms, which were becoming more factory-like, imitating the Industrial Revolution underway. Everything was going to be made standard. Everything was going to be made most efficiently, sold for the cheapest price. That has a lot of advantages. It also has a lot of costs as well. New York harbor scene here, a lot of stuff going on. Goods are coming and going, very representative of commerce at the time. You see a lot of ships here. One other major innovation, of course, throughout the 19th century was the railroad. And it's hard to describe how rapid this change was. You see, this is from a famous historical geography of the United States, published in 1930s. You see here rates of travel in 1800, it's showing you how long does it take to go somewhere from New York. How far can you go? Well, you can see from the graphic here, it takes 6 weeks, maybe 5, to get to the Mississippi River. Not even quite there from New York. 1830, right, it's half. 3 weeks, 2 weeks maybe, to get the same amount of time. That's just 30 years. That's just absolutely incredible. But if you think that's crazy, fast forward to roughly 1860. Now, 6 weeks you're going across the entire continent. And it's just a few days to get to what used to take a few weeks. And then just for good measure, 1930, getting a little ahead of ourselves, and now it's just a few days to go across the whole country. The amount of railroad track and infrastructure to make this happen, improvements of railroad technology and so on, is just absolutely tremendous. Well, there's serious consequences for food when you think about how fast you can transport it and how you can eat things that don't grow in your region. The idea of eating locally is completely transformed by the railroad. Railroad transportation and related technological changes altered the nature of food as a commodity. Meat prices dropped very quickly. Meat became far cheaper and more widely available than ever before. This was vegetables as well. But one of the consequences of having so much industrialized food, not just meat and vegetables, but lots of products that were being made at the time, was the potential for adulteration. Even in 1822, this is from London, but it's the same kind of process we can see in the US as well. treatise on adulterations of food, culinary poisons, fraudulent sophistications. Look at the list of stuff that's up here: bread, beer, wine, spirituous liquors, tea, coffee, cream, confection, vinegar, mustard, pepper, cheese, olive oil, pickles. This is all stuff that's being highly fraudulent. People are putting stuff in it to sell it more cheaply, even though you're not getting the real natural thing. One of my favorite cartoons from the time period is this. This is from Punch magazine, a London publication. I'm kind of blocking out a little bit of the cartoon there. Sorry about it. It says plaster of Paris, which is what walls are made out of. It's drywall, basically. And you see the skeleton making, if you see at the top here, bonbons for juvenile parties. Right? Candies had dyes, arsenic, plaster of Paris, all kinds of, all sorts, is up here, all sorts of stuff going in that was not only fraudulent, but actually dangerous, right? Culinary poison, stuff that was just allowing people to sell stuff more cheaply. This was a huge problem throughout the 19th century and the industrialization of food. So consumers, especially in cities, have all kinds of new options in terms of what to eat. Transformation on American diet was tremendous. It was way easier to buy more kinds of food. It was way easier to buy cheaper food. More people could eat for less money. But there's also a double-edged sword to this. It's easy to buy too much. It's easy to eat too much. It's unclear what consumers are buying. Adulteration was a real problem. Fraudulent food products were a real problem. Processed and refined foods, in many cases, were nutritionally inferior to the more natural versions. This was before enrichment and fortification, stuff that we started to see in the early 20th century. Stuff that spoiled, like milk, were potent vectors of disease. This is all in the mid-19th century, so this is before germ theory. This is before bacteriology. One of the most common medical problems was, in fact, dyspepsia, or what we would call indigestion. And you can get a sense of how important this was. This book is from 1820, sort of standard medical text. I believe it will be readily acknowledged that an organ, the stomach he's talking about, that possesses a preeminent power over the whole body. So we see here an example of how indigestion was not just a malady of the stomach. It affected the whole body. It created all kinds of disease. Having partially digested food in your stomach, if you ate too much or you ate too often, you had foods just sitting around, fermenting and rotting and sort of creating disease. It's like leaving fruit out on your kitchen counter in the summer. It just kind of rots and gets moldy and melts. You have that in your body if you're eating too much food and you're not digesting it fully. It just leads to all kinds of health problems. So not only are we eating too much and the food is too heavy, it's too rich, but also the quality of the food, the purity of the food has been compromised. You can see here, probably there is no so powerful predisposing and provocative agent in the production of diseases common to our country as improper food. We're not eating our natural diets. We're eating all this stuff in the city that's not really healthy anymore. We're eating too much processed, industrialized food, and it's causing all kinds of problems. And one of the biggest sort of health reformers, dietary reformers from the time period, 1820s, 1830s, was someone you've already heard of if you've eaten a graham cracker, Sylvester Graham. We see here, Presbyterian minister and dietary reformer, lived around 1800 to 1850, known for his emphasis on avoiding stimulation. Ardent vegetarian, thought we should be eating whole grain breads. He thought it was abysmal that people would buy their own bread. It was adulterated with drywall. It was adulterated with all kinds of sort of ground up stuff rather than actual flour, whole wheat flour, because that's way more expensive than the processed stuff. Store-bought bread was inevitably an inferior quality. Buying white bread was wrong and frankly immoral. Graham argued that we shouldn't have any stimulation in our diet. No caffeine, no tobacco, certainly no alcohol. Graham cracker, the original graham cracker, was just completely plain and dull. It didn't have cinnamon, sugar, and vanilla, whatever they put in it now. Very, very, and that was the point, very, very plain. You see him here, famous treatise on bread that he wrote, 1837. The history of bread, laws of diet, preparations of bread, varieties. Who should make bread? Everybody. Everyone should be making their own bread because buying it is going to lead to impure health. For Graham and other moral reformers, our natural instincts of eating according to the laws of nature were being overridden by the temptations of the city. There was too much food, the quality was too low, it was too processed. This was certainly a health problem, but it was also a moral problem. It was going against the law of nature, and what we're supposed to naturally eat was morally and spiritually dangerous. both for individual and collective health. So Graham was very clear. We needed to follow the law of nature in diet. And of course, the law of nature, the moral authority of nature, was really code for a particular religious belief about how we should eat or how we should live. And you get a sense of that when you look at one of his texts, Graham's System of Living, which is a sort of condensation of his lectures and other things that he would say. Look here, he's talking about animal food. The effects of animal food on the moral character is one of the most deplorable evils arising from its use. What a contrast between the tiger, renowned for his cruel, savage, and treacherous nature, and the inoffensive lamb, which we have adopted as the emblem of innocence. Eating meat is morally corruptible. It's decaying our society, and it's terrible. We need to stop, right? So here you have clear dietary advice couched in health terms, but also very clear moral terms as well. When we get to the readings for Monday, we see this happening in the 1890s and the early 1900s and 1910s. I just want to make sure you have this historical precedent in your mind before you get to those readings. This idea of moral advice and dietary advice have a long, long history together. Now you might think, okay, Gibbs, this is 1830s. Certainly all the nutrition research we've done, all the nutritional science that we now know has decoupled moral and dietary advice. Certainly they have to be separate now. And certainly they are more so than they are in Graham. But I want to suggest, and we'll see this again on Monday, whatever diet you want to adopt now, keto, paleo, blood type diet, whatever's in vogue, they do the same kind of thing. I study the history of natural diets. I'll save you the long tangent that I want to go on here. But the upshot is that people for the last 200 years have used their idea of what constitutes a natural diet or natural law as a justification for eating a certain way. And we'll pick up the intersection of dietary and moral advice on Monday. Graham died around 1850, so he didn't get to see what would become of the railroads and the industrial American diet. Here's a great advert for the Swift and Company, big meat packing company at the time. You see meat now, it's refrigerated rail cars up here. All these arrows are showing sort of centers of distribution. They're everywhere. They're going everywhere. Meat is fast. It's refrigerated. Don't buy meat from the way you used to. Don't buy meat from the guy in the hot wooden cart. There's no refrigeration. It's smelly. It's rotted. It's corrupted. It's railroads. Modern industrial diets are efficient. They're safe. They're economical. This is what you have to have. Of course, Graham would be really disgusted with the Union stockyards that really started in the 1860s, and by the 1880s, they had become this sort of monolithic place. You see the huge infrastructure here, all the railroad lines, all the places where animals get loaded and unloaded, pens where they stay, so the headquarters are up here. You almost can't comprehend the scale. I mean, look how far back we are. You can barely see it in this rendering here. Just tremendous place of modernity and technology processing meat. And this is one of the functions of the railroad, to bring more meat, cheaper meat to the city where people expected it, and so on. We'll get to more meat on Tuesday, so I won't belabor the point here. It's not just meat that's becoming more available and cheaper in the cities. This is the Gansevoort market in New York. It's now where the sort of meatpacking district is. This is predominantly fruits and vegetables being sold in this market. Eventually it becomes more meat because it's so close to the meatpacking stuff. But here in this photo, this is 1900. It's all fruits and vegetables. You see the density and the variety of stuff. This is just absolutely unprecedented, right? Even 20 years ago, there wouldn't have been nearly as much stuff. But in 1900, this market is absolutely thriving. Everything is becoming cheaper and more available. But the quality is different. The health concerns are different. The safety is different. So that a lot of pros and cons with this industrializing diet. But there's a constant push throughout the 19th century for more economy and more efficiency. And one thing you can do is put stuff in a jar. So one popular product, if you've ever bought sort of beef bouillon or the beef paste where you can sort of make stock, this is basically what it is. More substance of beef and a higher quality of beef than any other size. Extract of beef, putting the cow. Cows are big, they're expensive to move around. If you can reduce them into a little jar, right? It's more modern, it's more efficient, it's more economical. It's perfect for the 19th century. But advertisers who were selling these products, like extract of beef, had to work very hard to convince consumers that they were connected to nature. So we see these little cards that would circulate as advertisements. Lead Big Company, same thing we just saw, but it's all about the nature, right? You don't see the can and the signature. It's all about how natural it is and how pastoral it is, and everybody's happy and healthy, and the animals are running around having a good time. It's all getting put into this little jar that you can buy. It can stay on your shelf. Throughout the 19th century, canning was becoming more predominant, starting really in the 1860s. After the Civil War, a lot of soldiers, that's most of what they ate or all they ate, stuff from cans. They went home and they were more comfortable with it. It's weird to buy food that you can't see at the time, because that was definitely not common, but it becomes very common very quickly starting in the 1860s. There was a lot of resistance to canned goods and to packaged foods at first, because people were skeptical of what they were buying, rightly so. But you can see the variety of stuff that's here. Baked beans, salmon, there's corn, there's tomatoes. Advertisers had to work very hard to convince people this was connected to nature, and in fact, just as good, if not better. Vegetable soup, Campbell's. I love this ad. You almost don't notice there's a can of soup there. It just blends in with this massive array, this cornucopia of vegetables here. So hearty, so tempting, so delicious, so cheap, so convenient, so easy, and so on. You get the picture. So this is the story of 19th century food. Things are becoming more efficient, they're becoming more modern, they're becoming more economical, and this is what's selling them. This is what's driving the advertising. You're getting nature in a jar. You're getting it in a can. So by the mid-19th century, technology had created an inferior diet. It was too refined, it was too processed, all the nutrients had been taken away, it was unhealthy, it was adulterated. What was the solution? Well, for Graham and other social reformers throughout the 19th century, one solution was simplicity, purity. Go back to nature, eat whole grain bread that you made yourself. That was the answer. But for almost everyone else with capitalist ambitions, the answer was, you guessed it, more technology. So how do we get back to nature? Well, in this case, cereal. In 1876, John Harvey Kellogg became superintendent and physician at the Seventh-day Adventist Western Health Reform Institute. A mouthful. This became the Battle Creek Sanitarium, a much shorter title. A very famous resort. If you were upper middle class and above, a sanitarium was a fashionable place to go to get treated for a variety of maladies. So at the time, people were living in dirty cities. You saw the Gansevoort market picture. Just think how many horses were in that market at one time, dragging all those carts around. It's stinky, it's foul, smelling, stench. There's a lot of flies. It's just really, really kind of gross in a lot of ways, especially in the summer heat. So getting out of the city into purer air, purer water, trees, this was seen as a way of restoring health for a variety of ailments. And these sanitariums that you see in this picture here, this is sort of versions of the same one. This is the same Western Health Reform Institute in 66 and 76 here. You see how much bigger it's getting. These institutes often practice hydrotherapy and homeopathy, avoiding drugs, especially strong drugs. And the emphasis was on food. It was on fresh air, and pure food. And these sanitariums could get quite large, especially this Battle Creek one. You see it here in 76. By the 1890s, it was this sprawling structure. You see all the trees, all the water for the hydrotherapy. You see how many sort of resort seekers it could accommodate. This was all made of wood, and of course, as everything in the 19th century does, it burned down. Here we go. By the early 1900s, they rebuilt the whole thing out of concrete. 1906, this postcard, September 13th, that's my birthday. Just here for the day, big place. Yes, indeed, it was a very huge place. These sanitariums, incidentally, these places of health, that's what the name literally means, sanitarium, were very important as tuberculosis hospitals in the later 19th century, early 20th century, as health seekers with tuberculosis would get out of the dirty, damp city and go to pure, dry air. So we see a lot of these kinds of tuberculosis hospitals appearing in the Southwest, West Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Colorado, Southern Colorado. We're looking here at a early tuberculosis hospital in Albuquerque. These buildings aren't here anymore, but you're all familiar with this place. It turned into Presbyterian Hospital. If you're ever in the Huning Highland area, sort of east of downtown, between downtown and campus, Edo, I think it's called sometimes, you see a lot of the Victorian homes with these big open-air porches. Part of that was just the architecture, but a lot of that was also by design, because at the time, that sort of open-air cure, that freshness of hot, dry air was supposed to be very good for the lungs, very good for health. Back to Battle Creek, here we are at the sanitarium. Health foods, front and center. This is what they're advertising. The Sanitarium Health Food Company, obviously based at the sanitarium, they're preparing strictly pure foods for you, made with special reference and healthful properties, right? All this idea that you can purify yourself with healthful food. You see a reference to granola here. It's a long story about how that comes about. Granola is a healthful food. Look at the first line here. Granola is an invalid food. You probably didn't think of it that way until now. Thoroughly cooked and partially digested. And this is really key. This is really why I'm showing you this. The emphasis on pre-digesting your food so you don't have dyspepsia. You don't have indigestion. You feel better. You feel healthier. You are healthier. Notice the comparison to meat here. 1 pound more than equals 3 pounds of best beef. More efficient, more economical, right? And healthy. Doesn't take long before we get to our favorite toasted cornflakes. Here's an original box. I have no idea how this thing survived. But it's very plain, right? That's the point. It's just like the graham crackers. Not supposed to be any adulteration in it. It's supposed to be very healthful, very plain, very unstimulating. You might think that the invention of cornflakes is really about making the flake. And you see here a patent that changed the cereal aisle forever. Flake, or invented the cereal aisle, you might say. Flake cereals and process of preparing same. This is the official patent. We're not going to read through this whole thing. But the process that's really being patented here isn't the rolling out the flakes. People already had those rollers. They used it for granola. They used it for some other things. The key process here was making sure that the grains were sort of pre-digested ahead of time. So you had to roll them out, and first you had to soak them, then you rolled them out, then you soaked them again, then you steamed them, and then you baked them. And all this heating and cooling and heating and cooling would create kind of a fermentation happening and basically pre-digest the grain for you, so that by the time you rolled out the flake, it would be very, very easy to eat, right? So the rolling technology, which seems like it would be central, is actually far, far less important than the process of pre-digestion, right? Making food healthier, making it easier to eat, the quintessential goal of 19th century food production. I love this ad because when you look at this cornflake ad from 1906, you see in the upper left corner, it looks like a train, right? You can't help but see anything else. It's the same. It's consistent. It's cheap. It has a lot of flavor. This was super important in ads because it's a very clear contrast to what people perceived health food as like. From Graham, from those other social and moral reformers who wanted people to eat bland, pure food because they thought it was morally better for them. Now, cereal has to be very clear that it's healthful, but it's also very flavorful, right? It grows on you, as the ad says. One last set of ads, this time on shredded wheat, to illustrate the connection between cereal and nature. If you go to a wheat field with a magnifying glass, you see shredded wheat biscuits, I don't know if you knew that, to hold, as it were, the mirror up to nature. Look at the copy here. The whole wheat biscuit is the direct reflection of nature. It's the natural food intended by nature for man's use, right? Echoing the same kind of thing we saw with Graham in terms of the natural diet, the importance of following nature's law. But in this case, it's shredded wheat biscuits. Obviously a very highly industrialized food, but it's not just nature, it's actually better than nature because it's more economical, it's more efficient, and it's more readily available, and so on. And the juxtaposition between modernity and cleanliness and manufacturing and nature, on the other hand, is perfectly captured in this ad from the National Biscuit Company, by now known as Nabisco. You see the grandeur of Niagara Falls here, the power, the beauty, right? Everything is pure. The trees are pure, the water is pure, the air is pure, everything's nice. There's this tiny little building back here. Actually, it's this giant monolithic, very pure, very modern, very sanitary, very impressive looking building where they make your shredded wheat. But it's not just a factory, right? What is it? It's your kitchen. Our kitchen is your kitchen, trying to bridge that gap between industrialized food and food that you're going to serve in your home. It costs $2 million. What do you get? Cleanliness, sunshine, and pure air. That's what they're selling you in the shredded wheat biscuit, right? They're capturing that and they're serving you this giant building on the tray. I just love this image. These ads are just so fantastic. And so here we're clearly talking about the natural properties. There's also a social dimension to cereal as well. Her Declaration of Independence, so late 19th century, early 20th century, sort of more upper middle class and middle class families were not able to afford servants. Sounds like a terrible thing, right? But here you have a very upper middle class woman who has to serve breakfast herself. Now, what's she going to do? Well, she doesn't want to be tied to kitchen drudgery in order to do that. So Statue of Liberty pose. These ads are just so awesome. Holding up the shredded wheat, got the cracked Liberty Bell in the background. Can't be more American than that. Now anybody can have a healthful, easy, convenient breakfast, very American, right? Again, comparison to meat, more healthful in the summer than heavy meats, all the meat of the golden wheat, efficiency, economical, and so on and so forth. So why are we talking about cereal? Next time you walk in the cereal aisle, it's easy to think, gee whiz, there's lots of cereal. You might be annoyed you have to walk a ways to get to your Fruit Loops. It's really easy to think that this is inevitable, that cereal is just this, this natural thing. But hopefully after today, you can use the cereal aisle to reflect on what a unique American food it really is. And especially the way that it illustrates the unique interplay between technology and diet and health, and how cereal, for a long time, and still is in many ways, maybe not the sugar cereals that I showed you a second ago, how it's a powerful way of mediating our relationship to nature. In a way, I want to suggest it's the quintessential American food. We think of hamburgers, hot dogs, and so on. But when you think about sort of what encapsulates so much of American food, it's ubiquitous. You can get the same stuff anywhere, right? Any city has these giant cereal aisles somewhere. It's relatively cheap. Cereal seems to be getting more and more expensive, but it's a lot of breakfast in one box. It's a purveyor of health. The early cereals we looked at didn't have vitamins and minerals and fortified stuff the way that modern cereals do. Vitamins hadn't been discovered yet in the 1890s. But now you can sort of combine this fun and healthfulness of getting breakfast. And of course, it's the ultimate convenience food. It's always ready for you. It lasts forever. It's super quick to prepare, right? We can get to work. We can do more important things. So notice all the values that it embraces and perpetuates. Working hard, not wasting time in the kitchen, doing those kinds of things, right? Obviously, this doesn't make sense to people who like to cook and actually make food for breakfast. But when you think about sort of how big the cereal aisles are and how much variety there is and how much people use them, you get a sense of how important the values are that these reflect. And of course, what else I want you to remember is how technology and cereal and health and diet and morality are all combined into the same box here. And it embodies this long-standing, throughout the 19th century we just saw, but even going forward to today, this technological utopianism. When we have a diet problem, when we have a health problem, when we have a food system problem, the answer seems to be always more technology. And it certainly helps us, right? But there's always these pros and cons that go along with it. The next time you're in the cereal aisle, think about the 19th century origins as cereal as a response to an industrializing, unhealthy diet, and how it was seen as a sort of a technological cure to make nature better, to make it more economical, to make it safer, to make it more convenient, to make it cheaper. All of those values from the early 1900s still going strong in the cereal aisles today. On Monday, we look a little bit more at the coupling of moral and dietary advice in the late 1890s, early 1900s, especially towards immigrants and how they should adopt more American, more efficient diets. Tuesday, the only video for the week, is on industrializing meat. Many of you commented that you didn't really want to see how the sausage gets made. I don't blame you. The readings, though, they don't focus too much on the brutality of animals and the horribleness of meatpacking plants. They mention it, but it's really more about the capitalism and the economics and sort of the ways in which people work so hard to make meat more available and cheaper. But you see from today's video that was a long process that was happening over a long period of time, and one that's very easy to take for granted today. We'll get to that on Tuesday. In the meantime, have a great weekend.